destroying the cage. Fireworks exploded in the sky. Birds were terrified by the noise. The terrified birds flew away from the village. Like those terrified birds, a woman was leaving the village. She was adorned with coral and other jewels. She was going to another village. In the other village, she was going to marry a man. She had never met that man before. She was crying. Meanwhile, many children were laughing. They were laughing because people were throwing candies to them. In the east, the sun shone from behind a cloud. Sunlight struck the ground. The ground became gold. Despite the beautiful scene, that woman cried and cried. The red sun began to rise over the mountain and people began waking. The village came to life. Hardworking women sat in front of their adobe stoves and made fires with dried yak dung. White smoke wafted into the warm air. The air filled with the odor of dung. Those women's messy hair hung down their backs. The zigzag road to the village never changed. It looked like a rope stretched around the mountain. Livestock grazed on the green hills. The bright sunlight shone on the dust floating in the air around the animals. Wagging their tails, the animals seemed to be begging for food. A tall wall surrounded the village. This tall wall reminded villagers that their ancestors were soldiers. The descendants of those soldiers lived peacefully in the village, surrounded by the tall wall. Sunlight shone over the wall and into dark houses. A poor couple and their son lived in the center of the village. Their house was neither big nor small. A big wooden gate was the entrance to the family home. Above the family's gate there was a bell. A new auspicious scarf wagged in the gentle wind that morning. Behind the gate, in the courtyard, was an incense altar. It stood in the middle of the courtyard. That incense altar looked like a soldier guarding the family. Bright sunlight came through the gate and snuck past that soldier. The sunlight fell on the adobe bed, and the bed became gold. The odor of juniper wafted in the air. A pale wrinkled woman lay on the adobe bed. A pillow supported her feet, which stretched out from the quilt. Her feet were red and swollen. A divination had just been performed. That woman with red, swollen feet would soon die. Don't tell her. Keep it a secret. How sad. She was only 50. That poor woman had once been a beautiful girl. What happened to her? Was her situation caused by disease or destiny? Black clouds gathered in the sky while Daiji's condition got worse. She knew she would die. She called all the family members together. She quietly said, "Let Dorji attend school. It is important." Her husband gripped her hands tightly. "I promise I will let Dorji attend school." There was no sadness on his face, only determination. Slowly, Daiji's hands became soft. Her soul drifted away. A year passed. 3 motorcycles arrived at a large threshing ground in the village center. The motorcycles carried a bride and 6 well-dressed men. Their motorcycles were adorned with white silk scarves. The men wore traditional Tibetan robes. They were adorned with silver daggers and golden jewelry. Some wore expensive coral necklaces. These unsmiling men usually did not wear such adornments. But today was a special day. As soon as the men got off the motorcycles, they were welcomed with liquor and white silk scarves. A man held the white silk scarves. He was about 50 years old. He wore a green hat on his bald head. His body was covered in a new robe. The sleeves were folded up, and everyone could see his ivory prayer beads. The big shoes on his small feet seemed like a child wearing his father's shoes. His ugly face was hidden in the shadow of his hat. An embroidered tobacco bag hung from his sash. The groom was not there. He was at home. The guests entered a house near the threshing ground. A white scarf hung on the door. Faint Chinese and Tibetan writing on the door announced that the family had once had a scholar. The guests were seated. They looked carefully around the room. They saw a new Changhong TV covered with an embroidered cloth. There was a new DVD player below the TV. Embroidered curtains hung above the window. The floor was made from bricks. A table was covered with large plates of meat. The meat had a marvelous odor that wafted throughout the room. A colored picture of a holy man hung on a white wall. Through the open door a motorcycle could be seen. The bride's father smiled. Milk tea was poured into new bowls. Meanwhile, the bride bent her heavily adorned head. It seemed she had no neck bones. No one in the groom's home saw what she looked like. With the gods' protection, with the stars' help, through our agreement, we gather here hoping for descendants. You brought a daughter from the goddesses, said Dorji's father. Then he put a white silk scarf around the bride's neck. She didn't move and she didn't say anything. Her heart was crushed. The man's words felt like a knife in her heart. She began crying. Crying at a wedding is bad luck. Because of this, the wedding finished quickly. 15 dragon bowls and 5,000 yuan were paid to the bride's family. Then, the guests unhappily left. What happened? What is the matter with the bride? Though all the guests were sad, the village children played happily around the house, laughing. Night fell. The bride and groom sat close to each other on an adobe bed. Neither said anything. The groom was 18. He was excited. But, he was also nervous. He was excited by the idea, but nervous about the reality. He blew out the candle next to the adobe bed. Unwillingly, she let him. 3 months later, the autumn harvest was almost finished. The groom's father, Peng Mao, saw the bride's belly swell. They took good care of her. The old father now happily believed that his family line would continue. The family treated the pregnant bride well. She enjoyed delicious food. Unexpectedly, she gave birth 5 months after her marriage. Everybody was amazed. There was much gossip and many rumors in the village. The bride sat with her new baby. She smiled. She recalled what had happened 9 months earlier. She and her boyfriend Sairing lay naked together. They were happy and didn't think about the future. Rain fell outside her window. Sadness was far from her heart. Dorji divorced her. He kicked her and the baby out. She went to live somewhere else with her child. Her name was ruined. A year passed. Dorji worked in a distant town. He returned with 4,000 yuan and some gifts for his father. He was handsome and tidy. His hair looked very fashionable. He wore a black suit. My dearest son, his father called. He hugged Dorji. Though Dorji looked very different, Peng Mao still looked the same. However, he now had more wrinkles on his forehead. Dorji and Peng Mao ate dinner together. I visited Uncle Tashi's home, Peng Mao said to Dorji. For what? Asked Dorji. To organize your future, his father said proudly. My future? Please don't speak about my future, said Dorji. He had been happy to return home, but now he was suddenly sad. His face changed color. It became cold and pale. I have organized a wedding for you, said Peng Mao. Peng Mao's words exploded like a bomb in Dorji's brain. He began crying. Tears fell like beads from a broken string of prayer beads. He quickly wiped his eyes. He did not want his father to see his tears. His eyes were red. Anger rose in his heart. However, he couldn't change his fate. The wedding was arranged. The matchmaker and the bride's relatives arrived. Dorji's sisters also arrived. They were adorned with beautiful jewelry, gold rings, ivory bracelets, and coral necklaces. They walked with their noses in the air. Dorji's sisters were both beautiful and arrogant. They had come to see the new bride. Dorji's head was nearly between his knees. He was thinking of the year that his dear mother had died. One noon, the sky was clear and blue. The red sun hung in the blue sky. Dorji was cleaning the classroom floor. This was punishment from his teacher, because he had been absent from class. Dorji had been absent from class because he had much work to do at home. After his mother died, Dorji had to help the family. He needed to milk 3 cows, make milk tea and breakfast for his father, and take the family's sheep to the mountains. He needed to do all this every morning before school. So, he was often late for class and his teacher often punished him. Dorji's father arrived at school. He saw his son cleaning the classroom. "My son is not a servant. He came here to study, not to work for you," he yelled. His face became red. Students gathered to watch Peng Mao yell at Dorji's teacher. Dorji didn't understand what was happening. He didn't understand what his father was doing. What was Peng Mao's secret purpose? Peng Mao yelled and yelled at the teacher. Eventually, he took Dorji home. Dorji never saw a classroom again. Now, he was getting married a second time. The odor of meat, butter, and liquor wafted in the air. People laughed and chatted. Everybody was enjoying themselves, except Dorji. Dorji snuck out of the room. He walked out of the village. He went to the town and stayed there sadly. Meanwhile, the bride remained alone in Peng Mao's home. A secret voice told her, "Run. Go home." Eventually she ran away. Where would she go? Where should she go? Peng Mao was full of sadness. His son and his son's wife had both escaped. Peng Mao became sick with a mysterious disease. As soon as he heard the news, Dorji rushed home. He rode a horse through pouring rain. He was cold and his teeth were chattering. His face was red and his hands were numb. The rain hid the tears that ran down his cheeks. When he arrived home, Dorji saw his father. Peng Mao lay on the bed. His body was stiff and cold. His face was pale. His eyes were open, but Peng Mao was already dead. Dorji closed his father's eyes. They would never see the world again. Dorji fainted. His heartbeat became weak. Dorji vaguely saw his parents walking together. They walked towards him on a foggy road. They had big smiles on their faces. Dorji tried to see them clearly, but he couldn't. He reached out to touch them, but he couldn't. He tried to go to them, but an iron cage swallowed them. Dorji yelled, "No!" He suddenly awoke. He looked around. He was in a hospital room. And 4 bottles hung above him. Small bubbles in the bottle drifted upward, exploded, and disappeared. Dorji closed his eyes again. Again, he saw his parents in the iron cage. He reached out his hands and touched the cold iron. He tightly gripped the iron. Slowly, he began destroying the cage.